So have you heard this phrase before, the obstacle is the path? You hadn't? Nobody has? Oh, I kind of like it. It's actually a phrase that comes from Zen Buddhism. But it works today for what our scriptures lay out before us. See, it's an idea that's really very different from how we usually think of obstacles. When we think of obstacles, we think of an obstacle as something that we have to, overcome? We have to blow past it. We have to get around it. We have to find a way to make that obstacle not be an obstacle anymore. And so we're going to go over it. We're going to get around it. We're going to cast it. We're going to blow through it. This idea, though, that the obstacle is the path is really very different and hard for us to wrap our mind around. But before we get into wrapping our mind around the idea of an obstacle being the path, let me first give you permission to rub your shoulders and your arms and warm up a little bit, okay? And I'm not sure why the heat isn't turned up, but I know there are thermostats back there. I'm not sure which one does what. But something does something back there, right, Chuck? Yep. All right. But even if we were to figure it out right now, it wouldn't get warm enough by the time we're done. So you have permission to do this, and I won't be offended, I promise. Before we get into unwrapping the idea of the obstacle being the path, I want to show you how strong the impulse is for us to view an obstacle as a thing to get through rather than something to explore. Okay? Most of our games that we watch, especially football, are about blowing through obstacles. You have a place you want to get to, you got to get to that place, and you go there. And on Emma's soccer team, her coach is really big on setting the tone for the game. And if two people need to be in the same place where the ball is, he wants his team to be where the ball is and push the other people out of the way, right? We think of obstacles as that which must be gone through. All right, so here's a story put together by Rabbi Edwin Friedman. And Rabbi Edwin Friedman is one of the progenitors of a process of thinking called systems thinking. And you may not be familiar with systems thinking, but you've probably heard phrases like, don't get stuck in the middle, right? All right, and that's a thought that comes from systems thinking. All right, so here Rabbi Edwin Friedman is trying to figure out why it is that the maps of North America, as North America is being discovered, always show the ocean just past the landmass that they could see. Let me explain. There was a real strong push in the age of exploration to find a northwest passage to China, right? And to India. Vasco da Gama had found a way to get around Africa and to come up around the Saudi Peninsula and to get to India and to find those amazing spices and to bring those all the way back. And Europe loved these spices and these things that they got from China, that they became so focused, so oriented on getting to China, that they actually started to call China the Orient, because that is where all of our shipping needs to go. All of our trade needs to connect to there. We carry that word forward even to today, hundreds of years later, and talk about people from what is known as the Far East as Oriental. So they are so oriented on the Orient, they've got to find a way to get there. And they start sending out these explorers to find a way to get there. And whenever the explorers run into some kind of a landmass, they get a cartographer, a guy who makes maps, to draw a map and to show what it is that they ran into. So some of the earliest maps that you'll find of America are where you have a coastline, and then you have the mountains that you can see from the coastline, and then the cartographers are so dead set on finding this Northwest Passage, they just draw ocean after that. Like, there's got to be an ocean. And then they take that map back and they show it to the king, and the king says, well, keep trying. And so they send people out to keep trying, and Henry Hudson goes sailing up the Hudson River, and he looks over on his left, and he goes, hey, is Staten Island? Get it? Staten Island? I know. I am so sorry. But the trip up the Hudson River was trying to find the Northwest Passage, and all these inlets into the Chesapeake Bay was trying to find the Northwest Passage. And it wasn't there. But the drive to find that Northwest Passage to get to the Orient was so strong that when you fast forward even to the time of Lewis and Clark and Sacagawea, part of their mission was to figure out how big this territory is and find a way to get across it. All of North America during this time was an obstacle. An obstacle to get through, to get past, to find a way to get to the Orient. And you combine that with the idea of manifest destiny, and all of a sudden they find gold in California, and people are all about just getting from coast to coast, as if the stuff in the middle doesn't matter. And doesn't that carry forward today? Don't you hate it when people call your home state flyover state? You hate that. I know you hate that. Call Indiana flyover state, and the stuff in the middle, the flyover country, and to treat the people who lived there as an obstacle to finding the route. So after they discover the West Coast, there's a strong push to develop shipping yards on the West Coast that can get the stuff from the Orient to America, and then they had to figure out how to get it across, and so it started with stagecoaches, and then it went to trains in order to get the stuff across so it could finally be shipped to Europe. And in the process of being so focused, so oriented, the entire value of all this continental landmass and the people in it were simply seen as an obstacle to overcome, not as a people or a place to value. Do you see it? That idea that the obstacle is a thing to get past and through is so deeply rooted in us that to have someone say the obstacle is the path, well, that just sounds weird. But this idea, this Zen idea, is to say, okay, well, now there's this thing in the way. Maybe I need to understand and explore this thing. Maybe I need to understand and explore and value whatever this is that is in the way. My mind is racing right now with how that thought alone would change so many things in how we get along with one another, and how we find a way to get to contracts, and how we negotiate, and how we handle our politics, and how we handle our relationships, and how we set goals for our lives, and how we pursue those goals. My mind is spinning. What if we looked at the obstacle as the path? Well, Amos was trying to insert himself as an obstacle into the middle of a community's life. A community that was just doing fine the way that they were. I mean, everybody was making money and they were all doing okay, and they could just go about their business day by day, and it didn't seem like anything was wrong. And as long as everybody seems to be doing all right, we don't really need to grow a heart and have compassion on the poor and the homeless, because you're always going to have those folks. You just let them do the thing over there, and we'll just keep going about being prosperous. And Amos is trying to insert himself as an obstacle to that thought. And he's standing on top of the gate, and he's telling them, you can't keep living like this. You can't keep blowing past the poor. You can't keep ignoring those who are in need. You can't keep shoving to the side the orphan and the widow. This does not make God happy. And that's an understatement. And as Amos is trying to insert himself as an obstacle and call them to a new path, they instead are blowing past Amos and all that he seeks to represent to their peril. What if they had accepted the obstacle as the path? What if they had chosen to listen to Amos and to see that the people that they had been ignoring are part of their community? That the people they'd been ignoring are people with story, are people with heart, are people with goals, are people with history? And this guy comes up to Jesus. And Jesus, he says, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus says, well, the commandments. You got to do these and all these things. And he goes, well, I've done all that. So he thinks he's golden. Boy, why do we use gold as an idea for things that are right? That has something to do with our orientation, doesn't it? And Jesus says, well, there's one thing you lack. All right, I'm ready. Hit me with it. Go. Go and sell everything that you have, give the money to the poor, and then come follow me. Sharon, what was his response to that? Do you remember?
He was dejected.
He was dejected. He turned away grieving because of his many possessions. He had given his heart to his possessions. It is harder for people to give things up rather than to follow the obstacle who is asking to be the path. What if he'd listened and accepted Jesus' challenge? What if he saw Jesus not as an obstacle to the life that he was living, but as the path to life and life abundant? What if he'd agreed and stayed and followed Jesus in mission rather than following only those commands of God which are the most convenient to follow? Jesus frequently inserts himself as an obstacle in our lives, calling on us to interrupt the trajectory of our lives and reconcile ourselves with God. His teachings are hard. He teaches us that we can't live in service to both God and money, and yet we still try to do both. He teaches us that we have to love and forgive our enemies, and we'd rather see them squashed. He teaches us that we must get rid of even those valuable things that lead us into sin, and we'd rather just rely on the grace of God to forgive us for those sins. He teaches us that we've got to trust in God, even when it means that we don't know what's coming next, and we want to set a plan, and we want to know what's coming next, and we want to be prepared, and we don't just want to close our eyes and step off in faith. He asks us to give what's right to support the mission that he gives to us, not just what's left. And when he says these things to us, he challenges us to stop our momentum pursuing whatever it is that we are oriented toward and pay attention to him, our holy, obstacle. And let him and his ways become our life's path and our life's journey, so that our discipleship in our life is marked more by grace and by love and by mercy and by hospitality and by generosity